Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. Some authors write works of fiction that combine elements of two or more genres, and sometimes combinations of genres can become genres in their own right, a famous example being romantasy, which combines elements of romance and fantasy. For this episode, my interview guest writes novels in a combination genre, as she is the author of the Lily Barlow series of Romcomstery novels. Romcomstery combines elements of romance, comedy, and mystery. Her name is Carla Vergot, and my interview with Carla will follow the note-taking sounds. Carla Vergot, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, I am an author of 3 books, starting the 4th in my series, the Lily Barlow Series. I like to call it a Romcomstery, which is equal parts romance, comedy, and mystery. Before I started writing the books in 2016, I was teaching special education in the public schools. I took a sabbatical for a year, really loved the experience of writing the book, and resigned teaching to continue my series.
As your book series, and we'll talk a little bit about it in the further questions, as your book series is a romcomstery novel series, what is the romcomstery genre? Can you provide a brief explanation of it?
I didn't invent it. I wish I could take credit for it. I really struggled with coming up with a genre to describe the book, because it doesn't seem to really fit nicely into any of the existing genres. So I sticky fingered it from somebody that I had seen use it online. Romcomstery is romance, comedy, and mystery.
Your book series is called the Lily Barlow Series. Without spoiling too much of it, what is the series about? And I understand there's 2 books currently released, and what are the first 2 books in the series called and about?
The series is a continuation. So if you pick up the first book, you're going to want to read them in order. Each book takes place in about the span of a week. So it's a fast moving romp starting in 1 week. And then the next book picks up right where the first one left off. The third one will do the same. So the first 2 are called, the first one is Lily Barlow, The Mystery of Jane Doe, Dough. And the second one is Lily Barlow, The Mystery in the Mangroves. And book 3 comes out in the spring of 25, the spring of this year, Lily Barlow, The Mystery of the Tiles on the Tombstone. And basically, it's a young woman. She's college-age woman in her early 20s in a small town in Virginia. And the town is actually right up the road from where I currently live. So I got a lot of inspiration from that town. And I will say not everything is exactly perfect for what that town is, but I did draw inspiration from the town of Marshall, Virginia. So Lily lives there. She decides she needs to get out of that small town. It's stifling for her. And she heads off to college at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, which is about 2 hours from Marshall. And she feels like that's plenty of breathing room for her. But what happens is her dad has a heart attack. So she moves back home for a short stint to get their family bakery back online. And she fully plans to head back to school at that next semester. While she's there at home, she rents a room from a woman, because she feels like it's a sense of defeat if she has to move back home. So she moves in with Miss Delphine. She rents a room, and she believes through little serendipitous things that Miss Delphine says and hints that she drops, she believes that Miss Delphine has murdered somebody. Lily has a very vivid imagination. And while she's there, her best friend, Jack Turner, they've been best friends since kindergarten. He decides they should start dating And Lily believes that she has identified a murder victim that was shown online who the cops don't have an identity for. So there's a lot going on in book one. And as I said, book two picks up right where book one ends.
Okay. Well, the third and fourth books follow the same overall plot as the first two.
100%. Book three is book three took a really hard left. I was writing it during COVID, and a lot of my inspiration comes from travel. We weren't doing a lot of traveling. I like to take fishing trips with my husband. We weren't fishing. So I just didn't have the same kinds of inspiration that I usually have. It was really hard for me to finish book three. And it took a couple of strange twists that I didn't expect. But the format is the same. It's about a week's time, and all the characters, if you've read the first book, you'll know the characters. They're all there. A couple people, Jack Turner is kind of the love interest, if you will, and his brother Joe. A lot of people, when they read the first two books, wanted more Joe. So Team Joe started cheering me on, and I put a lot of Joe Turner in book three. And I've just started writing book four, actually.
You mentioned that the setting for the Lily Barlow series is based on, although not exactly identical to real life locations in Virginia. Were any of the characters in the series based on real life people?
Great question. I would say the character Jack is a compilation of the best quality of every man I've ever met. Jack is a pretty strong, good guy. And I just picked pieces of the men in my life and the men I've known, the best parts of them, and I made a Jack. Nobody else really is based on another human being that I encountered. Miss Delphine got her name. She's Lily's landlady, and she got her name. I was living in Florida at the time, and I was fixing to move up to Virginia, and my best friend and I down there decided to have an estate sale so I could unload a lot of, the stuff before I moved. We were at this in my garage. We had a lot of people coming and going, and it was partly inside, partly outside. And a couple of women rolled up, probably in their 70s, and one of them's name was Delphine. And the other one would scream from across the yard over into the garage, Delphine, Delphine, come look, come see. And I just loved the name, and I loved their friendship so much that I said on the spot, I'm going to write a character Delphine at some point. And so I honor those two women. I honor that person, Delphine, through this. I don't know them. I don't have any relationship with her. I wouldn't, I've no connection with her now. I could never find her. I'm not even sure she's still alive. That was some time ago. But that's the thing that I took character wise from somebody. And I sort of made Miss Delphine, kind of a brassy, snarky senior. But I don't know if that person really was that. So I can't say for sure that I based it on that human being.
How long did it take you to write each of the books in the series?
That varies from book to book, depending on what's going on in my life at the time. Book one took probably 7 months. I was working on it pretty diligently. I was working with a critique partner. She lived in my neighborhood, and I would go over to her house. She worked from home, her regular job, and she had a flexible schedule. So I would go over there a couple times a week, and we would sit. She set me up a little desk right by her desk. She was also an author, and together we would write for a day, 8 hours at a time, a couple days a week. And so that was a real targeted focus on writing. That book I finished in about, what did I say, 6-7 months, 7 or 8 months, something like that. Once it was finished, I had a hard time trying to get it published. I wasn't comfortable with doing a self-publishing. I wasn't comfortable with self-publishing. So I looked for a publisher. I couldn't find one. I looked for a literary agent to represent me. I couldn't find one. So I kind of went in circles for a period of time before I landed on my first publisher. But unfortunately, that business went out of business during COVID, so I had to start again. They had put one and two out in print, and then when I had finished book three, I couldn't get anybody to publish it until I republished one and two. I had to re-release those two. So it's been a bit of a Ferris wheel going just around and around, but that's where we are now.
On the bio on your website, you mentioned that writing the first chapter of the second book of the Lily Barlow series was the most difficult part of the series for you to write. Why was that?
Every time. The first chapter is just really intensely difficult for me to write. So when I got to book one, I finished it. I felt good about it. I loved where the story went. I thought there was more to tell. And so when I ended book one, I ended it with a happy ending. Because I needed to see if it was going to be published. There was no cliffhanger. It was a complete story. You wouldn't be looking for something else if if you finished that book, you would be satisfied. When I started, I felt like I got that book at the publisher. Everything's going the way it should go. I picked up on book two, and I wasn't sure how much information I needed to repeat to kind of get people up to date. I know, a year later, people have read hundreds of books. And so there's no way they would remember where I really left off. So I had to do kind of a setting up the stage type thing. But if they had read it recently, I didn't want to bore them. If they read it a long time ago, I wanted to give them enough information. If they had never read it, I wanted them to have something to go on with book two. So it was challenging. And I thought, wow, that was hard, but I did it, and now I'll do it better. Every first chapter is the same experience. I had the same problem in book three, and I just finished the first chapter in book four, believe it or not, same problem.
You mentioned quite a bit about your struggle to get the book, get the Lily Barlow series published. Who ended up publishing your book?
My first publisher was a great organization, entrepreneur, Lifestyle Entrepreneur Press. My second publisher, also a great organization, Morgan James Publishing.
And I've interviewed several authors from Morgan James, and they've all been wonderful guests.
Oh, that's nice to hear.
Now, do you plan on, or are you considering writing books outside of the Lily Barlow series? And if so, what are some ideas you have for books outside of the Lily Barlow series that you will or may write?
That is a great question. So Lily, one of the things, if I go too far away from your question, just reel me back in. So I want to give a little bit of background. My character Lily loves a character written by Janet Ivanovich named Stephanie Plum. Janet has, I think, 24 Stephanie Plum books in her series, and she's just a great writer. So I have to say I was inspired quite a bit by what she did with that series. And so I thought I could also, write a lot of books in the Lily Barlow series. I learned pretty quickly that it's a really hard thing to do. And so I don't know how many books will be in this series, but Lily is inspired by Janet's character, Stephanie Plum. So remind me of the question. I'm already too far away from your question.
What are some ideas you have for books outside of the Lily Barlow series that you will or may write?
Great. Okay. So once I finish this series, I've talked with some people who said it might be fun if I wrote from the perspective of another character in the series. This currently it's written in Lily's voice, so it would be the same style of writing, but in another character's voice. I actually have a different idea though, and I've been kicking it around. It would be a collection of perspectives, and I don't want to give too much away, but there's a theme that would tie together all these different people to one main point, one main person, and it would be just how they interacted. So what it would do is provide me with the opportunity of using a lot of different voices, and it would be a collection of narratives. That's convoluted. I know it doesn't really give you an idea of what the book is about, but I can't really do much more than that because I haven't teased it out. I'm just tinkering with it right now. And I'm not really sure that I can write Lily and this other story simultaneously. I'm one of those people who doesn't really read two different books at the same time. So I don't know if I could write two different books at the same time.
You mentioned that prior to becoming an author, you worked in special education. What was the most surprising part about becoming an author for you?
That it took so long to do it. I went to school at North Carolina State University, and my program was language arts, writing, and editing. I went to school to write a book, but life got in the way, and I ended up teaching, which I loved. Went back to school and got a master's so I could have a teaching certificate, and that was a great experience for me. But it just took me further and further away from actually writing the book. So the sabbatical was an important piece of getting it done, just fulfilling something that has been part of me for such a long time.
You've had a couple of critique partners that helped you out greatly as an author. How important are critique partners for authors, and how did your critique partners help you become a better author than you would have been without them?
I can't stress strongly enough how important they are. I think critique partners are the unsung heroes of an author's life. And I don't think that we use them in enough as authors. I wasn't looking for one. I didn't really know why I needed one. My friend, as I mentioned, when I was writing the first book, and she set an office up for me in her office. She was just bringing me in and mentoring me as I didn't even, I wasn't even looking for that. I didn't even know what it was or what it would do for me. But the ability to have somebody who listened to my story and didn't want to change it or drive it in any way, just was aware enough of the story where she could point out, hey, there's a hole here, or this doesn't make sense, or you need to get the sandpaper out and smooth this scene. It was really invaluable. And I encourage anybody who wants to start writing to try to find a critique partner. It needs to be somebody whose work you respect. And obviously, there needs to be time enough that the two of you can work together. So you need to find somebody who's got enough time for you. And you should fully expect that the critique partner will make your work better. And both of my partners have done that, both of them.
I have one final question for this interview. What is the best advice you could give to a new author?
Oh, don't wait. Get started. I wish I had gotten started 30 years ago, which is when I really, was thinking that's what I wanted to do, is write a book. But I will be honest, it wouldn't have been the same book. And I just needed life experience to prepare me for the character that I wanted to write. And I think those 30 years gave me that experience. But if I was giving advice to somebody, I would say start now, because you have to do so much perfecting and so much work on your craft that it's unlikely that your book will just spill itself out and be great. You've got to really hammer it in. It's not glitter and jelly beans. It's hard work to write a book, and the sooner you start, the better your book will be.
Carla, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were a wonderful guest.
I appreciate you so much, and thank you for making time for me.
In a departure from normal practice on this podcast, I'm going to include a Barnes & Noble link for Carla's books instead of an Amazon link in the text description of this episode. This is at Carla's request. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2025, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.